Good evening, everyone. To those who are here in the Zendo and to those online. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Mukei. I'm one of the senior students here at the Village Zendo and also one of the novice Zen priests. And we're all together because it's Halloween. And I ran into the week, said that the message was to go out that you were all supposed to show up in costume. And so far, I mean, the costumes that I see here in front of me are pretty interesting. But here we are, it's Halloween. And interestingly enough, Halloween used to be called All Hallows Eve. And before it was called All Hallows Eve, it was called Samhain, which was a Celtic celebration that took place in Ireland and Scotland that marked the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. Samhain was a festival that was located halfway between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice. It was a liminal time, and it was believed that the barriers between the living and the dead were quite porous. And so all the celebrations involved were about speaking or inviting the dead. It wasn't until the Christian missionaries arrived that it became All Saints' Day or All Souls' Day. And the idea was that the saints on November 1st, which is tomorrow, were men and women who lived lives of such virtue that they went to heaven. And then the next day, All Souls' Day, was the Day of the Dead. Those were the people who were still dead or were not allowed into heaven. It sort of reminds me of, if you've ever been to Penn Station, a huge waiting room. You're waiting for your room waiting for yourself to be called into heaven. But in the Buddhist tradition, we have what's called hungry ghosts. And ghosts are not the way we imagine them. It wasn't until the 3rd century, and even before that, that hungry ghosts were thought to be, while they were living in space, beings that were deserted or not paid attention to by ancestors. And then as Buddhism developed, it was that the hungry ghosts were punished because of evil deeds that they did. And again, going back to the 3rd century, the writings would say that you ended up being in hell, and there were 3 versions of hell. The most severe evil, you ended up in a hell realm with fire and brimstone and smoke and all that. And then the least evil, and they never said what these evils were, by the way, so you leave it up to your imagination. But the least evil is you came back as an animal, mostly a dog. And then the in-between, you ended up being a hungry ghost. And according to the tradition, the evil deeds that led up to becoming a hungry ghost are killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Desire, greed, anger, and ignorance are all the factors causing a soul to be reborn as a hungry ghost. There were legends that developed about the hungry ghost, and they were mostly about women. Only 2 stories I came across involved men, but they were mostly involved women. But one story is about the ghost on questioning Willie. Willie was a clairvoyant who misled his people due to his own greed, and thus he was reborn a hungry ghost. Another story is about the 500 hungry ghosts, is about 500 men whose sons of elders of a certain town they lived in. When the monks came to beg for food, the sons denied the monks because they thought the monks would keep coming back and eventually take all their food. After the sons died, they were born as hungry ghosts. There's only one story that is titled The Hungry Ghost Who Leads a Polite Life. And it's a story about a hungry ghost, not like his comrades or her comrades, who spent most of their time grinding coffee beans in a mortar and folding plastic bags in triangles and raking leaves. But the ghosts, that the image of a hungry ghost was people who were distorted. Their bodies were distorted. Their stomachs were big, and they had really pencil needle-like necks, and they couldn't find any substance. And they weren't in a hell realm with fires and smoke, but their bodies, because their bodies were so distorted, that was their hell. And it was thought that they lived in the bowels of the earth, but they also walk among the living. Sometimes they go around being noticed, and sometimes they want to keep their distance. Some religious traditions damn ghosts, send them forever into damnation. But in the Buddhist tradition, we feed the ghosts. We feed the ghosts. There's a chant that we have in our sutra book called the Gate of Sweet Nectar. And it was developed by one of our founding teachers, Bernie Glassman. Bernie Glassman was a Zen master who died, I think, about 6 years ago, who came across this writing about calling the hungry ghosts, invoking the hungry ghosts. And Bernie gave it to Krishna Das, and he said, here, take this and make this into a chant. And he says, well, I don't know what Krishna Dash said, I don't know what to do with this. He says, well, come up with something. He says, Buddhists don't know how to sing, so come up with something. So he did, and mostly the chant is used at the beginning of the Gate of Sweet Nectar. And it goes something like this. Calling out all hungry ghosts, everywhere through endless time, you who wander, you who thirst, I offer you this Bodhi mine. Calling out, you hungry spirits, everywhere through endless time, calling out to hungry hearts, all the lost and left behind. Gather round and share this meal, your joy and your sorrow, I'll make it mine. I first heard this chant when I started my Zen practice, when we used to go to a facility called the Grail. And we would remember those who had passed on. And I was very touched by the intimacy of those words. It wasn't like someone who had committed evil or did sexual misconduct, but the words say, you who wander, you who thirst. And it wasn't just one specific time, it was throughout all space and time. The lost and the lonely left behind, all those souls that are still lost and lonely. I don't know if you've been following the news as of late, but there's been reports about the Agency for Child Development that's done a very poor job of looking in and after children who are abused or neglected. And there was a story about a 9-year-old who was wheelchair bound, and his mother was his own caretaker. And his mother died while taking care of him. And that poor child eventually died of starvation. And I thought about how many people are lonely and just die, and there's no one there to witness them. So I thought even further, you know, those who wonder, those who thirst, those who are lost and left behind, they're all of us. They're all of us. If you been following the media as of late, I mean, they're the hungry ghosts. They're the hungry ghosts. My practice here has taught me that, you know, it's easy to want to say, well, it's happening in battleground states, but it's also happening right here. It's easier to say it's happening in Israel and Palestine and Ukraine, but it's happening right here. And our practice calls us not to separate. I had an opportunity to witness a full service of the Gate of Sweet Nectar. It was during the pandemic when the Zen Peacemakers did a Zoom version of the Gate of Sweet Nectar. And during the chanting of the opening verse, someone was dressed up as a ghost. Someone wore black and had on a white mask. And they came into the Zendo space, right where you would be sitting, Jikido. And what was interesting about the ghost is the ghost would just kind of look. I mean, got really up close, just kind of look. And everyone was dutifully chanting, right? And the ghost would weave in and out of the Sangha, just looking at people. I wonder if there's any ghosts in here tonight who are doing the same thing. What was really touching was that the ghost managed, the officiant had come to the altar, and the ghost came up this side, and they both looked at each other, and they bowed. And then this officiant gave the ghost a cup of tea, and the ghost drank, took a sip, bowed, and left. I see you, I am here, as the African saying goes. As I said, I wonder how many times when I've chanted or sung that the ghost is looking at me wondering what I'm doing. When I teach a class on Learn to Meditate, folks will say, well, how do I get rid of this? How do I quiet my thoughts? How do I get rid of this? And it's not about how do we get rid of, how do we live with? The word is intimate. How do we become intimate with those parts of ourselves that we would choose to keep some part away somewhere else? How do we get intimate with the rhetoric that's going on around us right now? It's not a matter of getting rid of, it's becoming intimate. And not in a sexual way either. I'm not using intimacy in that way. But how do we live? How do we live with all these aspects of ourselves? Because when we offer the tea, when we offer the recognition, we relieve some suffering. We relieve some suffering. That allows that hungry ghost to then move on, hopefully to wholeness. So as we honor our ancestors, for those of you who do at this time, let us also honor the hungry ghosts. The hungry ghosts who are right here with us in the Zendo and who are out there in the screen. So I'm going to ask you to join me in the Gatha of Transference of Merit. And if you feel so inclined, we go into Gasha. And there'll be a pause, and then I'll move on. By this practice, I sincerely wish to extend to all my love to my own being, friends, enemies, family, and community, and to all creations for so much done on my behalf. May those who practice in this sphere continue to empower, to enrich, to enjoy. May those who have gone be released from suffering and nourish peacefulness. May all creations in the three worlds receive loving benefactions. May those suffering on the three paths come to the atonement and be cleansed of all their ills. May they be liberated from samsara and arise in the Pure Land together. Let us forever remember the causes of suffering. Let us forever believe in the end to suffering. May we always have the courage to bear witness, to see ourselves as other and other as ourselves. May penetrating light dispel the darkness of ignorance, and let all karma be resolved in the pure flower bloom in eternal spring. May we all ascend to light enlightenment, great peace and love, and let us vow to feed all the hungry spirits together. Thank you.